The waiting list for the psychiatric evaluations of accused criminals remains a concern for families seeking justice. A family of a 16-year-old boy who was fatally stabbed allegedly by an 18-year-old is among those who are unhappy that the case is dragging due to the suspect being on the waiting list for psychiatric evaluation. Now, to discuss the impact of psychiatric hospital backlogs on ongoing court cases, we're now joined via Teams by Action Society's Ian Cameron. Thank you so much, Ian, for your time this afternoon. So let's talk about it. What do you think can be attributed to some of these backlogs in the psychiatric observations? And talk to us about the impact this has on those waiting justice. Ian, can you unmute, please?
Good afternoon. There we go. Sorry.
There we go.
It's still the beginning of the year. So I think there are a few serious frustrations regarding this. We've got quite a few cases as Action Society that are constantly postponed because of the backlogs in terms of psychiatric assessments that need to be done. Now, the challenge with this, apart from the fact that it really pressures the system in terms of the constant backlog and that there needs to be this constant following up, it makes it very frustrating for prosecutors, investigators alike, and obviously the community. But what really worries me is the pressure, the psychological pressure that it puts on the families of victims, and if victims survive, the victims themselves. They keep on having to relive this trauma over and over again because they constantly have to face the perpetrator in court, and it really makes it difficult for them to move on, to get some kind of closure.
There's also the element that forensic experts are the problem because there's not enough of them. And that could also be one of the issues that is causing these delays. I can think of a number of cases where we have these kinds of delays, Makaka case being one of them, 5 years in the making. Now the legal team wants to take one of the suspects, for an assessment. Just talk to us about that. What is needed in terms of just getting, that area, the kind of resources that is needed? The other question is it even getting the attention that it needs from the legal perspective?
No, so there are too many elements that need to be taken into consideration. The system at the moment puts a hell of a lot of pressure on the police. So it often creates the impression that the police is responsible for this, which isn't the case. It sometimes creates the impression that the National Prosecuting Authority is responsible. Other times, we hear that the Department of Health plays a role, or that the Department of Social Development plays a role. The point is just that it really is an integrated approach that is needed, and it can work and it can exist properly. The point is that we need some kind of a leader or some kind of forum where this integrated approach can happen properly. But I think if we look at the criminal justice system at large, the pictures that you're currently showing on the screen really emphasizes the constant onslaught on South Africans that we experience every single day, and something like psychiatric assessments kind of become a back of the mind thought as the onslaught is so constant and so consistent that people actually feel like they're just combating on the front lines and they're not worrying about what happens later. And obviously that is a severely flawed approach. It means that we can't expect decent prosecutions. We can't expect justice to really be served. Let me give you a good example. The case of the little girl Mia Botha in the Western Cape. It's almost 500 days since Mia's murder. We're still waiting for DNA results. So there are so many intricate parts of this criminal justice system that needs to be reconsidered and that needs to be streamlined. It would be irresponsible of me to simply say there's one department. We really need to get together, have the relevant role players around the table, and then build the new strategy from there.
I mean, to your point that, we need multifaceted kind of approach and different departments that are needed. One of the interesting things is that, that I read upon, mental health patients who are awaiting trial could in future have psychiatric observations in private hospitals, as the public sector continues to buckle under pressure, as we know, that has resulted in some of them waiting up to 2 years without being examined. Just looking at the health department as one, as a solution to alleviate some of these, delays, could that possibly be some of the solutions that we could be possibly looking at?
I think it could be an interim solution. It's not necessarily the ideal long-term option. I think it needs to be discussed because possibly it can play a longer-term role. Look, I'm convinced that the private sector would be willing to assist. But again, we come back to the current, especially the national government, and it's almost always, in the majority of cases, if the private sector gets involved, someone somewhere in national government wants to know how they will financially benefit from that. They want some kind of a kickback. And you and I can discuss it here theoretically. I think it can work. And I know for a fact that most of the private sector would be more than happy, likely at a very small cost even, to participate and see how they can assist, even if it's in terms of social workers and the role that they play, to get private social workers, private healthcare. There's so many examples of this. The only stumbling block to this is national government themselves. So not only are they shooting themselves in the foot by not managing it properly in the first place, they're not always so open to help, whether it's the police, prosecuting authority. There's so many examples, but I like your example and I think it is relevant. I think if we can have the private sector play a role in psychological or psychiatric assessments, it certainly can help to alleviate the pressure that the system is currently experiencing.
I mean, just as a final question, you mentioned the case of Mia Buerta. Just talk to us about, in the main, I mean, you've worked with various families who feel, justice has not served them in certain cases, particularly those that are prolonged. I mean, we've seen cases just through postponements taking up to 5 years, before they are actually underway in terms of a trial. What does this mean in terms of the families that you work with and just getting them to, trust the justice system again, which has come under heavy criticism for, just its failure in terms of expediting some of these cases. In most cases, it is through, heinous crimes like GBV cases, especially as it relates to children and women.
Yeah, spot on. Look, I think trust is a word of the past in terms of the current criminal justice system. Just today, my team was in court in Khayelitsha with the murder case of Nosipiwo James. Nosipiwo was murdered over 2 years ago. We actually tracked down the suspect in the Eastern Cape. We had to put pressure on the police to have him arrested in the Eastern Cape, brought back to the Western Cape, and the process ensued from there. But I mean, that case has been postponed, I think, 8 or 9 times. No real reason is given. And the challenge eventually is that a magistrate eventually just says, but I'm striking it from the roll because nothing is happening. There's no reason for me to order that this person stays behind bars because investigation is incomplete or a prosecutor didn't do what they needed to do. So it really destroys trust and it makes it difficult for us. I think currently my team has about 110 cases on the being worked on. And when we look at the majority of those dockets, it takes so much work just to get the family to come to court. It takes so much work to motivate them, to say to them, but hey, there is hope, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm an eternal believer of there is hope. There's always some kind of hope. It's something we must hold on to. But it does get very, very difficult when you have the state buckling the way you said it now. They completely have buckled, and it makes it very challenging then to get people to trust the system, because I certainly do not trust the system as it is now.
And it actually sounds like a missed opportunity, you know, where the legal fraternity, in fact, maybe even throw it out into the whole, you know, industry in terms of law enforcement. There is almost like a missed opportunity of using this opportunity to go on an educational drive in terms of how systems should be working and how the public can then, you know, make sure that there is accountability.
Yeah, look, I've received a lot of criticism about what I'm about to say, but one of the biggest mistakes the previous regime in South Africa and the current regime in South Africa has made is that they create this constant state dependency, almost as though the state has the monopoly on every service that you may need. This is a very dangerous precedent that is set because they centralize power to a point where you really, as a community member or as part of some kind of a community organization, have very limited scope in what you can actually do legally when it comes to certain services, especially when it comes to more complex things like healthcare, law enforcement, etc. Now, this precedent is very dangerous because, as you said, we could actually have a great opportunity here where private sector, community organizations and government get together and say, hey guys, how can we split the load between each other? What can we do to give the community some kind of statutory power, well-trained? I'm not saying, you know, train a whole lot of vigilantes or something like that. I'm saying go and look what the responsible way is to give people statutory capabilities with the private sector as well, obviously with the relevant checks and balances in place, instead of trying to have the state monopoly in certain roles. And unfortunately, at the moment, the state seems to have the monopoly on a lot of what could have been done and what often can be done by community structures or community organizations and the private sector.
All right, Ian, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I really do appreciate it. Ian Cameron from Action Society.